The cold stone floor bruised Yuna's knees, but she didn't dare shift her weight. Outside, the endless medieval rain battered the high glass windows of the great hall. It had been raining for 6 days straight, turning the courtyard into a deep pit of thick, brown mud. That same mud now dripped from the heavy iron boots of the men standing just 10 feet away from her. Yuna kept her head down, her rough hands pushing a dirty rag in slow, wide circles over the wet stone. She had played the part of a mute, stupid scrub girl for 3 long years. She was a ghost, a nobody in a coarse brown dress. But tonight, the sharp smell of fresh blood cut through the damp, smoky air of the hall, and her heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "She is here, Julian," a harsh voice spat. Lord Vane stood tall in his dark armor, the metal clinking as he shifted his weight. He lifted a heavy boot and kicked a bundled shape on the floor. A man groaned in wet, bubbling pain. Yuna recognized that sound. It was the sound of a lung filling with blood. She didn't look up. She kept scrubbing. The icy water in her wooden bucket turned grey with dirt. "This piece of shit confessed," Vane sneered, pointing a thick finger at the dying man on the floor. "The silver bitch is hiding right under your royal nose, right here in your own damn castle." A heavy silence fell over the hall. The only sounds were the crackle of the massive fireplace and the endless drum of the rain. Then King Julian stepped forward. He moved like a massive, dangerous shadow. Even without looking up, Yuna knew exactly how he looked. Broad shoulders, a face carved from angry stone, and eyes as cold as a frozen lake. He smelled of pine wood and old smoke. "Watch your fucking tone in my house, Vane," Julian said. His voice was a deep, low rumble that made the hair on Yuna's arms stand up. "You drag bleeding trash into my hall in the middle of the night, bleeding all over my floors, and you bark at me." "The girl is a fugitive," Vane shouted, taking a step toward the king. "She killed my brother. She has a death sentence on her head signed by the High Council themselves, and I know she is here." Yuna's hand stopped moving. Her fingers gripped the wet, dirty rag so hard her knuckles turned white. If Vane looked down, if he really looked at the scrawny servant girl hunched over a bucket in the shadows, it would be over. Her head would be on a spike before sunrise. Please leave a like on this video if you are enjoying the story. It really helps the algorithm push more videos like this to your feed. Also, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from today. And listen closely. If you don't hit that subscribe button for Warlords right now, you might leave Yuna to be dragged out by her hair and executed in the mud. Don't be the reason she loses her head tonight. Subscribe to save her. Vane paced back and forth, the heels of his boots grinding the mud deep into the cracks of the stone. Yuna forced her hand to move again, circle after circle. Wipe the stone, wring out the rag, plunge it into the freezing water. Do not look at the blood, do not look at the king. "Your brother was a weak fool who got his throat ripped out because he drank too much and picked a fight with a wild dog," Julian said slowly. He didn't sound angry. He sounded bored, which Yuna knew was infinitely more dangerous. "You are chasing a ghost, Vane. The silver wolf has not been seen in the south for 3 years. She is dead, probably starved in the woods." "She is not dead," Vane roared. The sound echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. He reached into his thick leather belt and pulled something out, throwing it violently onto the long wooden dining table. It hit the thick oak with a sharp, heavy clatter. Yuna didn't have to look to know what it was. It was the heavy silver medallion, the mark of her old pack, the one thing she had lost the night she ran. "My hunters found this in the lower village," Vane said, his breathing heavy and ragged with anger. "Buried under the floorboards of a tavern. The tavern owner said a girl traded it for a safe ride in a hay cart 3 years ago. A cart that came straight to these castle gates, bringing winter supplies." Yuna swallowed hard. Her throat felt like it was coated in dry sand. She shifted her weight slightly, moving her right hand toward the deep pocket of her apron. Hidden beneath the rough fabric was a small, sharp iron dagger. It was nothing special. Just a stolen kitchen knife she had sharpened on a rock until it could slice through leather. If she had to, she would drive it straight into Vane's neck. She wouldn't go down without taking someone with her. "A piece of silver proves nothing," Julian said. He picked up the medallion. Yuna heard the metal slide against the wood. "Anyone could have stolen this, a beggar, a thief." "The man bleeding out on your floor says otherwise," Vane challenged. "He says he brought her here, a girl with white blonde hair and a scar across her jaw. He says she slipped inside the castle walls and never came back out." Yuna tilted her head down even further, making sure her dull, dirt-smeared brown hair fell completely over her face. She had dyed it with walnut shells and mud every single week for 3 years. It smelled terrible, but it kept the bright, unnatural white hidden. The scar on her jaw was covered by a thick layer of soot she rubbed on her face every morning, pretending she was just clumsy with the fireplace ashes. She owed Julian nothing. Yes, the king had allowed her to stay when he found her shivering in the stables 3 years ago. He had looked at her, seen the desperate, starving animal in her eyes, and instead of calling the guards, he had tossed her a heavy wool blanket and told her to make herself useful. He had never asked her name. He had never asked where she came from, but Una knew Julian was not a stupid man. He had to know she was hiding from something. But right now, survival was all that mattered. Una's mind raced, calculating her options. If Vane demanded a full search of the castle, she would be lined up with the other servants. They would wash her face. They would see the scar. She needed to leave, tonight. There was a loose stone behind the wine barrels in the cellar. Under it was a small leather pouch holding exactly 12 silver coins. She had stolen them one by one over months, taking only what wouldn't be missed, 12 silver coins and her small iron knife. It was enough to buy a horse or bribe a boatman at the docks. She would go east, or maybe far north into the frozen mountains where nobody cared about kings and lords. "I am going to search this castle, Julian," Vane said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Every room, every stable, every servant's quarters. I will line up every dirty whore and scrub girl in this place and wash their faces myself until I find her." Julian didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his massive frame blocking the light from the fire. "You will do no such thing." "Are you hiding her, Julian?" Vane stepped closer. The tension in the room snapped tight like a rope about to break. "Are you protecting an enemy of the High Council? Because if you are, that is treason, and even a king can hang for treason." Una stopped breathing. She squeezed her eyes shut. She thought about the cold rain outside. She thought about the mud. She thought about how much she hated this world, how it forced her to crawl on her hands and knees just to stay alive. She didn't want to die. She refused to die. She slowly slid her hand into her apron pocket. Her cold fingers wrapped tightly around the wooden handle of the small dagger. "Are you threatening me in my own hall?" Julian asked. His voice was so soft, so terrifyingly calm, that one of Vane's guards actually took a step backward. "I am merely stating the law," Vane said, though his voice wavered just a fraction. "Let me search the servants." "No," Julian said. "Why not?" Vane demanded, stepping forward again, his heavy boots splashing loudly into the puddle of bloody water right next to Una's bucket. Mud and red water splashed up, hitting Una's pale cheek. She flinched, biting down hard on her bottom lip to keep from making a sound. The iron taste of blood filled her mouth. Vane looked down. For the first time he actually noticed her. He stared at the top of her dirty brown hair, at her thin, shaking shoulders. "You," Vane barked, pointing his boot at Una. "Look up at me." Una froze, her heart slammed against her chest. Fuck, she thought, fuck this. She tightened her grip on the knife. She calculated the distance. If she lunged upward, she could bury the blade under his chin before his guards could draw their swords. She would die right after, cut to pieces on the stone floor, but Vane would choke on his own blood first. "I said look up, you stupid bitch," Vane shouted, reaching down to grab her by the hair. Before his thick, armored glove could even touch her, a massive hand grabbed his wrist. The loud crunch of bone echoing in the silent hall made Una gasp. Julian twisted Vane's arm violently. Vane let out a sharp, pathetic scream, dropping to his knees on the hard stone. Julian stood over him, still holding his wrist, his dark eyes burning with a sudden, uncontrollable rage. "You do not touch my people," Julian snarled, his voice vibrating with a monstrous, inhuman growl that shook the very foundations of the room. "You do not raise your voice in my home, and you certainly do not give orders to my servants." Vane gritted his teeth, his face pale with pain. "Julian, let go." "Get out of my castle," Julian ordered, throwing Vane's arm away in disgust. Vane scrambled back, slipping in the mud and blood. "Take your dead trash with you. If I see your face inside my walls again, I will tear your head off your shoulders and feed it to the hounds." Vane stood up, cradling his wrist against his chest. His face was twisted with hatred and pain. He glared at Julian, then looked down at Una, who was still kneeling by her bucket, her hand gripping the hidden knife. "You are making a mistake, Your Grace," Vane hissed, stepping backward toward the heavy wooden doors. "The High Council will hear of this. I will return with an army, and if I find her, I will burn this entire castle to the ground just to hear her scream." Vane turned and stormed out of the hall, his guards rushing to drag the dying man out behind him. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, rattling the iron hinges. The loud echo slowly faded, leaving nothing but the sound of the rain and the crackle of the fire. Una stayed on the floor. She didn't move, she didn't breathe. Her mind was screaming at her to run. The tunnel, the coins, leave now before he turns around. But she didn't run. She stayed exactly where she was, staring at the dirty grey water in her bucket. Julian stood perfectly still in the center of the hall for a long time. He took a deep, heavy breath, rubbing his jaw. Then, very slowly, he turned around and looked down at her. "Get up," he commanded, his voice tired and rough. Una hesitated. She slowly let go of the knife in her pocket. She pushed herself up off the wet stone, her knees aching from the cold. She kept her head tilted down, her dirty hair hiding her face. She held her hands tightly in front of her, playing the part of the terrified, simple servant girl. Julian stepped closer. He stopped just an arm's length away. The heat radiating off his large body fought back the damp chill of the room. "Look at me," he said. "It wasn't a request." Una squeezed her eyes shut for a second. This is it, she thought. This is where I run, but her legs wouldn't move. She slowly lifted her chin, opening her eyes. Julian stared at her face. He looked at the soot rubbed across her jaw. He looked at the muddy, fake brown color of her hair. He didn't look angry. He just looked extremely tired. He reached out slowly. Una flinched, but she didn't pull away. Julian's large, rough thumb gently brushed against her jawline, wiping away a thick streak of dark black soot. Beneath the dirt, the jagged, pale white scar was clearly visible. Julian stared at the scar for a long time. The only sound was the heavy rain outside. 3 years, Julian said quietly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. 3 years you've been scrubbing my floors, Una. Her real name. Hearing it out loud for the first time in years felt like a physical blow to the chest. She stared up at him, her heart stopping completely. He knew, he had always known. Una stepped back, her wet boots slipping slightly on the slimy stone floor. I do not know what you mean, Your Grace," she whispered, forcing her voice to shake. It wasn't hard to fake, she was terrified. "I am just a scrub girl, I am nobody, my name is just Una." Julian let out a long, heavy breath. He looked down at the dirty rag she had dropped in the grey, bloody water. "Stop it, Una, the act is over. Vane is gone and the guards are outside. It is just you and me." "I scrub your floors," she said, her voice growing a little harder, a little more desperate. "I clean the pig pens. I do not know any silver wolf. You have the wrong girl." Julian took a slow step toward her. Una took another step back, her right hand diving deep into her apron pocket. She gripped the wooden handle of her hidden knife so hard her fingers cramped and ached. "You hide your hair," Julian said, pointing a thick finger at her head. "You cover your face in black soot every single morning. You walk with your shoulders hunched over, trying to look small and weak. But you do not walk like a servant, Una. Servants drag their feet when they are tired. They make noise. You walk on the balls of your feet, completely silent. You walk like a hunter, like a wolf." Una stopped moving. The cold air in the large hall felt like it was freezing her lungs. The game was up. "If you knew," she said, her voice dropping the high, squeaky tone she used for the kitchen cooks. Her real voice was low, rough, and entirely exhausted. "If you knew what I was, why didn't you hand me over to the High Council 3 years ago? The bounty on my head would pay for a new castle." "Because the High Council is full of corrupt pieces of shit," Julian said simply. He crossed his massive arms over his chest. "And because I do not execute starving girls who show up at my gates in the middle of winter." "I am not a girl," Una spat, anger finally pushing through her fear. "I am a monster with a death sentence on my head. Vane is going to come back. He is going to bring an army of hunters. He will burn your stone castle to the ground just to get to me." "Let him try," Julian said. "You are a fool," Una shouted. She pulled the iron knife from her pocket, holding it out in front of her. Her hand was shaking, but her grip was tight. "You are a damn fool, King Julian. I am leaving, tonight. If you try to stop me, I swear to God I will cut you." Julian looked at the small, pathetic kitchen knife. He didn't laugh, but his dark eyes narrowed in annoyance. "Put that away before you hurt yourself." "Get out of my way," Una demanded, stepping to the side, trying to circle around his massive body toward the servants' hallway. Julian moved faster than a man his size should be able to move. 1 second he was standing perfectly still, and the next he was right in front of her. Una gasped and thrust the knife forward. She didn't want to kill him, but she had to get away. The blade hit the thick leather of his vest and stopped dead. Julian didn't even flinch. His large hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like a steel trap. He squeezed, pressing hard on the nerve. A sharp, burning pain shot up Yuna's arm. Her fingers went numb instantly, and the knife clattered loudly onto the stone floor. Julian kicked it away into the dark corners of the hall. "Are you done playing with kitchen toys?" Julian asked, his voice a low rumble near her ear. He didn't let go of her wrist. He pulled her slightly closer. He smelled like fresh rain and violence. "Let me go," Yuna hissed, struggling violently against his grip. "You have no right to keep me here. I am a dead woman. If I stay, I bring death to your whole kingdom. Let me run." "You are not going anywhere," Julian said. He turned and started walking toward the heavy doors at the back of the hall, dragging her along with him. Yuna stumbled over her long, wet skirt, forced to jog just to keep up with his long, angry strides. "If you run into the mud tonight, Vane's hunters will track you down by morning. You think you are invisible, Yuna. You are just lucky." The heavy oak door of the king's private study clicked shut, cutting off the drafty chill of the great hall and replacing it with the suffocating heat of a roaring hearth. The room was much smaller, filled with tall wooden shelves of dusty books and a massive dark wood desk covered in open maps. The fire popped and hissed loudly in the silence. Julian finally let go of her wrist. Yuna stumbled backward until her back hit the solid wood of the door. She rubbed her sore arm, glaring at him like a trapped animal ready to bite. Julian walked over to a small silver tray near the fire. He picked up a glass bottle and poured a dark amber liquid into 2 metal cups. He picked them both up, walked back over, and held one out to her. "Drink," he ordered. "I don't want your damn wine," Yuna said, crossing her arms over her chest. She was shivering uncontrollably. Her clothes were soaked through from kneeling on the wet floors, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her freezing and weak. Julian set one cup down on his desk and drank from the other. He took a long, slow swallow, closed his eyes for a second and sighed. He looked incredibly tired, the lines around his eyes deep and dark. "It is not wine, it is whiskey, and you are shaking so hard I can hear your teeth chattering from across the room. Drink it." Yuna didn't move. She stared at the bright flames in the fireplace. "How did you know it was me? The night I came here, I was covered in mud and horse shit. I didn't smell like a wolf." "You bled on my stable floor," Julian said. He leaned his hips against the edge of his heavy desk. "You had a deep cut on your leg from a silver blade. Silver wolf blood doesn't smell like regular shifter blood, Yuna. It smells like crushed iron and pine needles. I walked into the stables the next morning, took one breath, and I knew exactly what you were." Yuna swallowed hard, feeling the dry lump in her throat. "Then why make me a scrub girl? Why didn't you just lock me in the dungeon?" "Because a locked door brings questions," Julian said slowly. He set his metal cup down next to the maps. "If I locked you away, my guards would talk, the cooks would talk. Someone would wonder who the secret prisoner in the dark was. But a dirty girl with a scarred face scrubbing the floors, nobody looks twice at a scrub girl. You become part of the furniture. It was the only way to keep you completely hidden from the High Council." "You gambled your entire crown," Yuna whispered. She couldn't understand it. In her harsh world, nobody did anything for free. Everyone wanted something. Every favor had a bloody price. "Why? What do you want from me? I have nothing to give you. I don't even have my wolf anymore. My wolf hasn't spoken to me since the night my pack was slaughtered." Julian looked at her. His dark, angry eyes softened just a tiny fraction. "I don't want anything from you, Yuna. I just wanted you to live." "Well, I won't live long now," she snapped, pacing back and forth in front of the heavy door. "Vane saw me. He knows I am here. He is going to ride straight to the capital. They will send 100 men with silver chains. They will rip this place apart." She stopped pacing and pointed a shaking finger at him. "And they will hang you for treason, Julian. They will hang you right next to me." "Let them come," Julian said. His voice was completely calm. He didn't sound scared at all. "Are you crazy?" Yuna yelled, throwing her hands in the air. "You are going to risk your life, your people, your whole damn castle, for a girl you don't even know." "I know you better than you think," Julian said softly. He pushed himself off the desk and walked slowly toward her. Yuna stiffened, pressing her back flat against the door again. He stopped right in front of her. He was so tall she had to tilt her head all the way back just to look him in the eyes. "I know that you wake up screaming every time there is a bad storm. I know that you steal bread from the kitchens and hide it under your mattress because you are terrified of starving again. I know that you sharpen a stolen kitchen knife every single night in the dark." Yuna's breath caught in her throat. "You spy on me." "I protect you," Julian corrected. He reached out and gently pushed a wet, muddy strand of hair out of her eyes. His large fingers were warm against her freezing skin. And I am not going to stop now. I cannot fight them, Una said, her voice finally breaking. A single tear mixed with the black soot on her cheek and rolled down her face. I am not the silver wolf anymore. I am just broken. If I stay here, we all die. Please, just let me run away. If you run, you die alone in the dirt, Julian said. He reached down and grabbed both of her shoulders. His grip was firm, holding her in place. You are not broken, Una, you are surviving, but the time for hiding in the shadows is over. Vane forced our hand tonight. What do we do? She asked, hating how small and desperate she sounded. We fight, Julian said, his dark eyes burning with a sudden, dangerous fire. We wash that fake mud out of your hair. We put a real sword in your hand. And when Vane comes back with his army, we show them exactly why they should be terrified of the silver wolf. Una let out a short, harsh laugh. It sounded like glass breaking in the quiet room. She looked at Julian as if he had just grown a second head. Fight, you want to fight them, you are out of your damn mind. She pushed away from the door, her wet boots making a squelching sound on the wooden floor. She walked toward the center of the room, her hands throwing wild gestures in the air. I am not a soldier, Julian. I am a scrub girl. I have spent 3 years on my hands and knees scraping pig shit and mud off your floors. I haven't held a real sword since the night my family was slaughtered. Julian watched her pace. He didn't move from his spot. You still know how to hold one. Muscle memory doesn't just vanish. My wolf vanished, Una shouted, turning to face him. Her chest heaved up and down. The anger was finally burning away the freezing cold fear in her veins. Do you not understand that? I am useless. The night the High Council sent their assassins to my pack, I watched my father get his throat torn out. I watched my mother burn inside our own home. I ran into the woods and my wolf, she just broke. She went deep inside my mind and she never came back. I haven't shifted in 3 years, Julian. I cannot hear her, I cannot feel her. I am just a weak, pathetic human now. You are not weak, Julian said. His voice was dangerously low. He took a slow step toward her. A weak person would have died in the snow. A weak person would have hung herself in the barn. You survived. You did whatever you had to do to stay alive. That takes a kind of strength most of those soft, fat lords on the High Council will never understand. It makes me a coward, Una spat, tears of frustration finally spilling over her dirty cheeks. I hid like a rat. You hid to survive, Julian corrected her, taking another step. He was right in front of her now, looking down at her shaking frame. And your wolf is not dead, Una. A wolf only dies when the heart stops beating. She is hiding because she is scared, because you are scared, but the hiding ends tonight. Una looked up into his dark, steady eyes. Why are you doing this? Why are you throwing your life away for a girl who lied to you? Because this is my home, Julian said, his jaw tightening. Because I am the king of the South, and I do not let stuck-up pieces of shit like Vane march into my castle and threaten my people. You are my people, Una. Whether you scrub the floors or lead an army, you are mine to protect. And I say we fight. Una stared at him. The absolute certainty in his voice made her stomach twist into knots. She had spent 3 years trusting nobody, expecting everyone to stab her in the back. Now the most powerful man in the kingdom was standing in front of her, willing to risk a war just to keep her head on her shoulders. It was stupid. It was completely insane. And yet, for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel entirely alone. If we fight, we will probably die, Una whispered, her voice rough. Then we make them bleed for every inch of ground they take, Julian replied smoothly. He turned away from her and walked over to the back wall of the study. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy iron key. He fit it into the lock of a thick, hidden wooden door built seamlessly into the bookshelves. The lock clicked with a loud snap. Julian pushed the door open. A wave of intense, dry heat rolled out into the study. Una could smell burning pine wood and rich soap. Inside, Julian ordered, nodding his head toward the open doorway. Una hesitated, wrapping her arms tightly around her wet, shivering body. What is in there? My private quarters, Julian said. There is a fire and a bathing tub. Go inside, strip off those freezing, wet rags and wash that damn mud out of your hair. Una's eyes went wide. She took a step back. I can't. If I wash it off, it becomes real. As long as I look like this, I am just Una the scrub girl. If I wash it off. Vane already knows, Julian said, cutting her off softly. The disguise is useless now. It is only slowing you down. Go wash. I will find you some dry clothes. He didn't wait for her to argue. He walked back to his desk and started rolling up the maps. Una swallowed hard. She slowly walked toward the hidden door. The heat calling to her freezing bones was impossible to resist. She stepped over the threshold and walked into the king's bedroom. It was massive. A huge bed with thick dark fur blankets sat in the center. A massive stone fireplace took up an entire wall, the flames roaring high and bright. And in the corner, sitting on a round rug, was a large wooden bathing tub. Steam was already rising from the hot water inside it. Julian appeared in the doorway behind her. He held a stack of folded clothes in his hands. He set them down on a small wooden chair near the fire. He didn't look at her. "There is lye soap on the stool," Julian said, his back turned to her. "And a brush. Scrub until the water runs clear. Take your time. I will be out here when you are done." He walked back into the study and pulled the heavy door shut. The loud click of the latch echoing in the bedroom made Una jump. She was completely alone. She stood frozen in the middle of the room for a long time. The only sound was the heavy rain beating against the thick glass windows and the loud crackle of the burning logs. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in mud, blood, and grey dirty water. Her nails were cracked and broken. Her rough brown dress felt like a heavy, icy chain wrapped around her body. Slowly, with shaking fingers, Una reached up and pulled the simple knot at the back of her apron. The wet fabric fell to the floor with a heavy, wet slap. She untied the laces of her coarse woolen dress, shivering as the cold air touched her damp skin. She stripped off the dress, the undergarments, and finally, the heavy, muddy boots. She kicked the pile of dirty clothes into the far corner of the room. She never wanted to see them again. She walked over to the wooden tub. The water was steaming hot. She placed one bare foot inside. The heat bit into her frozen skin like a sharp needle, making her gasp. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. She slowly lowered herself into the water, sinking down until the water reached her chin. She closed her eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. For 3 years, she had washed in freezing buckets in the dark corners of the stables, rushing to clean herself before the sun came up. She had forgotten what it felt like to be truly warm. But she couldn't just sit there. She had a job to do. Una reached out and grabbed the block of harsh lye soap from the wooden stool next to the tub. She rubbed it between her hands until a thick, white foam formed. She brought her hands to her face. She rubbed the soap hard against her jaw, digging her fingers into the thick layer of black soot she had applied that morning. The soap burned her eyes, but she didn't stop. She scrubbed her cheeks, her forehead, her neck. She dunked her head underwater, rubbing her face furiously. When she came back up, gasping for air, the water around her had turned a murky, dirty grey. Next was the hair. This was the hardest part. The walnut dye and mud mixture she used was thick and stubborn. It stuck to her hair like tar. Una took a deep breath, took the soap, and started working it into her scalp. She pulled at her hair, scrubbing the roots, scraping the mud away with her fingernails. The smell of wet dirt and bitter walnuts filled the steamy air. She dunked her head again. She ran her fingers through her hair underwater, pulling the heavy clumps of mud loose. She came up, wiped the water from her eyes, and looked at the tub. The water was completely black, like a puddle of ink. There was a large wooden bucket of clean, hot water sitting on the hearth next to the fire. Una stood up in the tub, shivering as the air hit her wet skin. She grabbed the bucket by the rope handle, lifted it with a grunt, and poured the clean water over her head. The black water ran down her back and washed away down the drain hole at the bottom of the tub. She grabbed the soap and started again. Wash, scrub, rinse over and over. Her arms ached. Her scalp burned from the harsh lye, but she kept going. She watched the water turn from black to dark brown to light brown. Finally, after what felt like an hour, she poured the last bit of clean water over her head. She looked down at the bottom of the tub. The water running off her body was clear. The disguise was gone. Una stepped out of the tub. Her legs were shaking so badly, she almost slipped on the wet stones. She grabbed a large, thick white towel from the stool and wrapped it tightly around her body. She grabbed a smaller towel and started drying her hair, rubbing it aggressively to get the extra water out. She walked over to the fireplace to get warm. Above the stone mantel was a large, polished silver mirror. Una stopped dead in her tracks. She slowly lowered the towel from her head and stared at her reflection. She almost didn't recognize the woman looking back at her. Gone was the dirty, brown-haired scrub girl with the smudged face. Her hair, clean and damp, fell down her back in loose, wild waves. It was completely, starkly white. Not silver, not blonde. Pure, unnatural white like freshly fallen snow. It was the mark of the royal bloodline of the northern packs. It was a death sentence. Her skin, scrubbed clean of the dirt and grease, was pale and smooth. Her eyes, no longer hidden behind dull, messy bangs, were a bright, piercing silver grey. And then there was the scar. Without the black soot to hide it, the scar was violently obvious. It started just below her right ear and slashed down her jawline, ending near her chin. It was thick, jagged, and pale white against her skin, a permanent reminder of the silver blade that had almost taken her head off the night she ran away. Una reached up and traced the rough skin of the scar with her fingertips. Her hand was shaking. She looked like a ghost. She looked exactly like the monster the High Council was hunting. She swallowed the lump in her throat and turned away from the mirror. She couldn't look at it anymore. She walked over to the wooden chair where Julian had left the dry clothes. There was no dress. He had left her a pair of thick black woolen pants, a soft white linen shirt, and a heavy dark leather belt. They were clearly his clothes. Una dropped the towel and pulled the pants on. They were way too big. She had to roll the cuffs up 3 times just so she wouldn't trip over them. She pulled the thick leather belt tight around her narrow waist, punching a new hole in the leather with the metal buckle to make it fit. She slipped the large white linen shirt over her head. The sleeves hung down past her hands, so she rolled them up tightly past her elbows. The shirt smelled like pine needles and Julian. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She walked to the heavy wooden door, grabbed the iron handle and pushed it open. The study was quiet. The maps were put away. Julian was sitting in a large leather chair near the desk. He had a long, heavy steel sword resting across his knees. He was running a grey whetstone slowly down the edge of the blade. The sound was a sharp, rhythmic shhhk, shhhk, shhhk. He stopped moving the second the door clicked open. Julian slowly lifted his head. His dark eyes locked onto Una as she stepped out of the bedroom into the warm light of the study. He didn't say a word, he just stared. He looked at her bare feet on the wooden floor. He looked at the oversized clothes hanging off her thin frame. He looked at the jagged white scar completely exposed on her jaw. And finally, his eyes moved up to the bright, glowing white hair falling over her shoulders. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and heavy. Una felt totally exposed. She crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly wishing she had her dirty brown dress back. "Say something," Una muttered, her voice defensive and sharp. "Tell me I look like a freak. Tell me I look like a target, just say it." Julian slowly set the whetstone down on the small table next to him. He placed his massive sword on the floor, leaning it against the chair. He stood up, towering over her. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. "I was going to say," Julian started, his deep voice softer than she had ever heard it, "that it is an absolute damn crime you had to hide yourself in mud for 3 years." Una blinked, caught totally off guard. "I look like a wanted criminal." "You look like the Silver Wolf," Julian corrected her. He walked slowly across the room until he was standing just a few feet away from her. He looked down into her silver eyes. "You look exactly like what you are, Una, a survivor, and they are going to wish they had never come looking for you." "Vane is going to bring an army, Julian," Una said, dropping her arms to her sides. He wasn't lying. "The High Council will send hundreds of men. They have silver weapons, they have hounds. We cannot fight an army alone." "We are not fighting alone," Julian said. He turned and walked over to his large wooden desk. He opened the top drawer and pulled out a heavy roll of thick parchment paper. He tossed it onto the desk. "Vane thinks I am just a stubborn king sitting in a stone box. He doesn't know what I have been doing for the last 3 years while he was busy drinking and kissing the council's ass." Una frowned, walking closer to the desk. "What have you been doing?" Julian looked at her, a dark, dangerous smile slowly spreading across his face. It was a smile that promised violence. "I have been building an army of my own. Wolves who hate the High Council just as much as you do. Outcasts, rogues, people who lost their packs to the Council's greed. I have been quietly moving them into the southern mountains, giving them food, giving them land, waiting for the right moment to strike back." Una stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You were planning a rebellion." "I was planning a war," Julian said flatly. "The High Council has ruled with fear for too long. They slaughter anyone who doesn't bow to them. They slaughtered your family. They tried to kill you." He leaned over the desk, resting his large hands on the wood. "I was waiting for a spark, Una. Something to rally my secret army behind. A symbol." Una took a step back, suddenly understanding exactly what he meant. "No, no, Julian, you cannot use me. I am not a symbol. I am not a leader. I told you my wolf is gone." "Your wolf is sleeping," Julian said, his voice firm and commanding. "And it is time to wake her up. When my army sees the Silver Wolf standing next to me holding a sword ready to bleed to take down the council, they will fight like demons. You are the last surviving royal of the North. You are exactly what we need." This is madness, Una whispered, shaking her head. If we lose, everyone dies. Every single person who follows us will be executed. Then we better make damn sure we don't lose, Julian said. He reached down to the floor and picked up his heavy steel sword. He held it out, offering the handle to her. Una stared at the wrapped leather grip. The steel blade caught the light of the fire, shining bright and deadly. She felt her hands start to shake again. If she took the sword, there was no going back. The scrub girl was dead. The hiding was over. It would just be blood and fire and war. Take it, Julian ordered softly. Stop hiding, Una, take the sword. Una slowly raised her right hand. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of the crossguard. She took a deep, shaky breath, closed her eyes, and wrapped her hand tightly around the leather grip. She opened her eyes and pulled the sword toward her. It was heavy, but the weight felt familiar. It felt right. Good, Julian said, his dark eyes burning into hers. Now let's go prepare for visitors. The heavy steel sword pulled at Una's arm, but she didn't let the tip touch the floor. Her knuckles turned white around the dark leather grip. She stood perfectly still in the warm study, listening to the loud, angry rain beat against the glass. Julian didn't wait for her to get comfortable. He turned his back to her, opened the heavy oak door of his study, and walked out into the dark stone hallway. He expected her to follow. Una swallowed the dry lump in her throat. She looked down at her bare feet, taking a deep breath. She stepped out of the warm room and followed the king back into the freezing reality of the castle. The main corridors of the castle were completely silent. The thick stone walls trapped the freezing dampness of the storm outside. The only light came from the iron torches bolted to the walls, the orange flames throwing long, dancing shadows across the floor. Julian walked fast, his heavy boots echoing loudly. Una had to jog slightly to keep up with him, her bare feet making almost no sound at all. She felt completely naked without her heavy, dirty apron and her face covered in mud. Every time they passed a dark corner, she expected a guard to jump out and grab her by her stark white hair. They reached the end of the long hallway and stopped in front of a massive set of double iron doors. 2 guards stood on either side, holding tall wooden spears. They were wearing thick chainmail and dark green cloaks. When Julian approached, they immediately stood up straight and banged the bottoms of their spears against the stone floor in a sharp salute. But then, they looked behind him. The guard on the left, a young boy with dirt on his nose, dropped his spear entirely. It hit the ground with a loud, clattering crash. He stared at Una with his mouth hanging wide open. The older guard on the right didn't drop his weapon, but his hand moved instinctively toward the heavy sword at his belt. He looked at her pale skin, the jagged white scar on her jaw, and her glowing white hair. He knew exactly what she was. Every man in the kingdom knew the stories of the Silver Wolf. Your Grace, the older guard said, his voice shaking badly. He took a half-step forward, blocking the iron doors. My king, step away from her, she is. She is under my protection, Julian cut him off, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't even look at the guard. Pick up your damn spear, boy, and open these doors. The younger guard scrambled to pick up his weapon, his hands shaking so hard the wood rattled against the stone. The older guard hesitated for just 1 second. He looked at Julian's dark, cold eyes, and then he looked down at the heavy sword in Una's hand. He swallowed hard, grabbed the heavy iron ring of the door and pulled it open. Julian walked into the room, and Una stayed right behind him, keeping her eyes fixed on the broad space between his shoulders. She didn't want to look at the men inside. This was the war room. It was a massive, circular chamber made of dark grey stone. There were no windows, only a dozen massive fireplaces built into the walls, filling the room with intense heat and the sharp smell of burning pine. In the very center of the room sat a huge, round wooden table. It was covered in thick parchment maps, small wooden blocks painted red and black, and several empty wine cups. 4 men were leaning over the table. They were Julian's top commanders. They wore heavy leather armor covered in deep scratches and dried mud. They were arguing loudly, their voices bouncing off the stone walls, but the second Julian walked into the room, they all went completely dead silent. Una stepped out from behind Julian's massive frame. She held the sword tighter, bringing it up just an inch higher. The tallest commander, a man with a thick black beard and a patch over his left eye, slowly stood up straight. He looked at Julian, then his single dark eye snapped to Una. His face turned pale and then twisted into pure, violent anger. What the fuck is this, Julian? The bearded commander spat. He didn't use the king's title. He reached across the table and grabbed the hilt of his own sword. You brought the Silver Wolf into the war room. Her name is Una Thorne, Julian said, walking completely calmly to the head of the table. He rested his large hands flat on the edges of the map. And she is going to help us save this castle. Thorne let out a harsh, barking laugh. He looked at the other 3 commanders who were all staring at Una like she was a demon that had just crawled out of the fireplace. Save the castle? She is the reason Vane is going to burn this place to the ground. You have lost your damn mind. If the High Council finds out she is here. Vane already knows she is here, Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. He was in the Great Hall 20 minutes ago. He brought a dead man who confessed to smuggling her inside my gates 3 years ago. Vane demanded to search my servants. I broke his wrist and threw him out into the mud. The silence in the room was suffocating. The only sound was the loud crackle of the 12 fireplaces. Thorne let go of his sword and dragged his hands down his tired, scarred face. You broke a lord's wrist over a fugitive. You just started a war, Julian. A war that has been coming for 3 years, Julian corrected him. He looked down at the map, then back up at the men. Vane is riding for the capital right now. He will go straight to the High Council. They will give him an army of hunters, and he will march back here to take my head and hers. How long do we have? Asked a shorter, completely bald commander leaning on the left side of the table. He didn't look angry, just incredibly tired. The storm is bad, Julian said, tapping a heavy finger on the map. The roads are deep mud. It will take him at least a full day to reach the capital and another day to march an army back here. We have 2 days, 3 if the rain washes out the bridge at Red River. 2 days to prepare for an army of silver hunters, Thorne muttered, shaking his head. We have 140 guards inside the walls. Most of them are boys who have never seen real blood. Vane will bring 300 trained killers. They will bring silver-tipped arrows. They will bring hounds. Send word to the mountains, Julian ordered, looking directly at the bold commander. Send the fastest rider we have. Tell the rogue packs to march down the hidden trails. Tell them the time has come. Thorne slammed his fist onto the wooden table. The empty wine cups rattled loudly. The mountain packs will take 3 days to get here. We have to hold this castle against the High Council's elite hunters for a full day and night with 100 boys. It is suicide, Julian. Hand the girl over. Una took a step backward. Her bare heel hit the cold stone. She felt the sudden, desperate urge to turn around and run back into the dark hallway. She could still make it to the cellar. She could still find her 12 silver coins. Thorne was right. This was absolute suicide. Julian didn't yell. He didn't slam his fist. He simply stood up straight and looked at Thorne. His dark eyes were so cold, so entirely empty of fear, that Thorne actually took a small step back. I am the king, Julian said quietly. The softness of his voice was terrifying. I gave you an order. If you do not want to follow it, you can walk out those iron doors right now, leave my castle, and never come back. But if you stay, you will shut your mouth, you will draw your sword, and you will bleed for this home. Choose. Thorne stared at Julian for a long, heavy moment. The muscles in his thick jaw flexed. He looked down at the table, let out a deep breath, and shook his head. You are a stubborn bastard. You are going to get us all killed. But Thorne didn't walk to the door. He leaned back over the map. Fine, if we are fighting, we fight. The rain is on our side. They cannot use fire arrows to burn the wooden gates. They will have to use battering rams. The mud will slow the rams down. We put our best archers on the front wall and pick them off as they push. The other commanders nodded, pulling the wooden blocks across the map, placing red blocks at the front gate. They were planning a defense. They were really going to do this. Una watched them. She looked at the red blocks. She remembered the night her family died. She remembered the screaming, the smell of blood in the snow, the sound of the High Council hunters breaking through the windows. She took a slow breath. Her hands stopped shaking. They won't attack the main gate, Una said. Her voice was low and rough, but it echoed clearly in the quiet stone room. All 4 commanders stopped moving. They turned their heads and stared at her. Julian looked up from the map, his eyes locking onto hers. What did you say, girl? Thorne asked, his visible eye narrowing with clear disrespect. Una stepped forward. She didn't look at Thorne. She walked right up to the edge of the large wooden table. She set the heavy steel sword down on the map with a loud thud. She looked down at the painted wooden blocks. I said they won't attack the front gate, Una repeated, her voice growing a little stronger. You are thinking like regular human soldiers. You think they care about breaking down the doors to get inside. They don't. Hunters don't fight like that. And you are a military expert now, Thorne sneered. Because you washed the dirt off your face. Una finally looked up at him. She stared right into his single eye. Her bright silver eyes were completely cold. I know how they fight because I watched them slaughter my entire pack in less than 20 minutes. I watched them kill my father, who was twice the fighter you are, before he could even draw his weapon. Thorn closed his mouth. He didn't say another word. Una looked back down at the map. She reached out with her rough, calloused finger and pushed the red blocks away from the front gate. She moved them to the back of the castle, near the steep, rocky cliff that dropped down into the roaring river. The storm works for them, not us, Una explained, her mind racing back to the nightmares that haunted her every single night. The rain is loud. It hides the sound of movement. They wear dark leather, not metal armor. They won't march up the main road with a heavy wooden ram. They will split into small groups of 5. She pointed to the cliffside on the map. They use heavy iron hooks coated in thick black tar so they don't make a sound when they hit the stone. They will scale the back wall in the dead of night. They will slit the throats of the guards on duty before they even know they are there. Then, they will open the side doors from the inside and let the hounds in. The bold commander frowned, looking at the cliff on the map. The back wall is 70 feet high and slick with rain. No man can climb that. They are not just men, Una said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They are High Council executioners. They take silver dust and mix it with their blood. It makes them faster. It makes them not feel pain. They will climb that wall like spiders. The room was completely quiet. The commanders looked at the map, visualizing the attack. The back wall was their weakest point. They only kept 4 guards there because they believed the cliff was completely impossible to climb. Julian watched Una carefully. A slow, dark shadow of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. What do we do about it, Una? She looked at Julian. The fact that he was actually asking her for a strategy made her stomach twist. She wasn't a general, but she wanted to live. She wanted to survive just one more day. We let them climb, Una said, turning her attention back to the table. We take the guards off the back wall entirely, make it look like we are totally focused on defending the front gate. We let the first group of hunters get over the wall and drop down into the courtyard. Are you insane? Thorn exploded, his face turning red. You want to let them inside the walls? Yes, Una snapped back, slamming her hand flat on the table. Because if you try to shoot them off the wall in the dark and the rain, you will miss, and they will just keep coming, but if we let them drop into the courtyard. She reached across the table and grabbed a handful of black wooden blocks. She placed them in a tight circle in the center of the courtyard on the map. We wait for them in the mud, Una finished. We hide in the stables and the heavy shadows. When they hit the ground, thinking they are sneaking in, we surround them. We trap them inside the walls and we butcher them before they can open the gates for the rest of their army. Julian looked at the black blocks surrounding the red ones. It was a brutal, bloody trap. It required absolute discipline and extreme violence. It was a massive gamble. It's a slaughterhouse tactic, the bold commander said softly, rubbing his chin. If we fail to kill them quickly, we are trapped in the courtyard with them. We won't fail, Julian said. His voice left absolutely no room for argument. He looked at Thorn. Take 40 of your best men, give them heavy axes and short swords. Long spears are useless in the dark. Tell them to cover their armor in mud so the metal doesn't shine. I want them hidden in the stables by tomorrow night. Thorn looked at Una, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at his king. He banged his fist against his chest in a solid salute. Yes, your grace. The rest of the men stay on the main walls, Julian ordered, looking around the table. Keep the fires burning bright at the front so Vane thinks we are watching the road. Nobody sleeps tonight. We prepare the trap. The commanders nodded. They began grabbing their helmets and swords, rushing out of the heavy iron doors to start giving orders. The war room cleared out quickly, leaving only Julian and Una standing alone by the large wooden table. Una stared at the map. Her chest was rising and falling quickly. She had just planned a massacre. She had just told these men how to kill. Julian walked slowly around the table until he was standing right next to her. He reached down, picked up the heavy steel sword she had placed on the map, and held it out to her again. I told you, Julian said softly, his dark eyes fixed on her pale, scarred face. You are not a broken thing, Una. You are the Silver Wolf. Una looked at the sword. She slowly reached out and grabbed the leather handle. It felt even heavier than before. I don't know how to fight with a sword, Julian, she whispered, the tough act completely falling away now that the other men were gone. I can swing a kitchen knife, but if I try to fight a trained hunter with this, I will be dead in seconds. I know, Julian said. He took a step closer, crowding into her space. The heat radiating off his body was intense, which is why we are not going to sleep tonight either. Una looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. What? Julian reached down to his waist and drew a short, heavy dagger from his belt. The blade caught the firelight, shining a bright, deadly silver. If Vane is bringing an army, you need to remember how to kill, Julian said, his voice completely calm as he flipped the dagger in his hand, catching it by the blade. He offered the handle to her. We are going down to the training yard, and you are going to hit me until you remember exactly what you are. The heavy iron doors of the war room closed behind them with a loud final thud. Julian did not stop walking. He led Una down a narrow, winding stone staircase that smelled of damp earth and old mice. Una followed close behind him, her bare feet slapping softly against the cold stone steps. She gripped the heavy silver dagger so tightly her hand cramped, but she refused to let it go. The air grew colder with every step down. Finally, Julian pushed open a thick wooden door, and the deafening roar of the storm hit Una right in the face. They stepped out into the main training yard. It was a wide, open space surrounded by high stone walls. The ground was usually packed dirt, but after 6 days of endless rain, it had turned into a thick, slippery pit of dark brown mud. There were no torches lit out here. The only light came from the pale, hidden moon shining weakly through the thick storm clouds. The rain fell in heavy, freezing sheets, instantly soaking through Una's oversized linen shirt. She shivered violently, wrapping her free arm across her chest to hold on to whatever body heat she had left. Julian walked straight out into the middle of the yard. The mud sucked at his heavy leather boots with loud, wet popping sounds. He didn't seem to care about the freezing rain. He reached up and unbuckled his thick leather sword belt, tossing his heavy steel sword onto a dry wooden barrel under the roof overhang. Then he pulled his heavy leather vest over his head and threw it on top of the sword. He stood in the pouring rain in just his dark pants and a thin, wet shirt that clung tightly to the thick muscles of his chest and arms. He turned to face Una. "Step into the mud," Julian ordered. His deep voice easily cut through the loud noise of the falling rain. Una stayed under the dry edge of the roof. She looked at the deep, freezing mud. She looked at Julian's massive, imposing figure waiting for her. "This is stupid," she yelled back, her teeth chattering loudly. "I am freezing. I am exhausted. You are twice my size. If we fight, you are just going to break my bones." Before we continue with this brutal training session, please leave a like on this video if you are enjoying the story. It really helps the algorithm push more videos like this to your feed. Also, drop a comment and rate Una's chances of surviving the upcoming battle from 1 to 10. And listen to me closely. If you don't hit that subscribe button for Warlords right now, you might leave Una's inner wolf to sleep forever, leaving her weak and helpless when the hunters arrive. Don't let her die in the mud. Subscribe to wake the silver wolf. "Vane's hunters are bigger than me," Julian shouted back, swiping wet, dark hair out of his eyes. "And they will not care if you are tired. They will not care if you are cold. They are going to drag you out of your hiding spot by your white hair and they are going to cut you to pieces. Now step into the damn mud, Una." Una swallowed hard. The absolute truth of his words hit her like a physical punch to the stomach. She took a deep breath, letting the freezing night air fill her lungs. She stepped out from under the roof. The rain immediately plastered her white hair flat against her face and back. Her bare feet sank deep into the cold, squishy mud, the icy slush coming up past her ankles. She walked slowly toward the center of the yard, stopping about 5 feet away from him. She held the dagger up in front of her. Her hand was shaking so badly the silver blade vibrated in the dark. "You hold it like a wooden spoon," Julian said, his voice full of dark disgust. He didn't even put his hands up to defend himself. He just stood there, completely relaxed. "You are holding it tight because you are scared of dropping it, but if you hit bone, your hand will slide right down the handle and you will slice your own fingers off. Move your thumb to the top." Una frowned, blinking the heavy rain out of her eyes. She shifted her grip, placing her thumb flat against the flat metal guard at the top of the handle. It did feel more secure. "Good," Julian said. "Now come cut me." "I am not going to stab you, Julian," Una yelled, wiping rain from her face. "You are the king." "Right now I am the man trying to kill you," Julian snapped. He took a sudden, massive step forward. Una gasped and swung the dagger wildly in a wide, desperate arc toward his chest. She was too slow. Julian didn't even try to dodge. His large hand shot out and grabbed her wrist in midair. He twisted her arm down and to the side, stepping his foot behind her ankle. In one smooth, violent motion, he swept her leg out from under her and shoved her hard by the shoulder. Una flew backward. She hit the ground hard, her back slamming into the deep, freezing mud. The breath was knocked completely out of her lungs. Dirty water splashed up into her nose and mouth. She coughed violently, rolling over onto her hands and knees. The mud covered her white shirt, turning it a dark, filthy brown. Her whole body ached. Pathetic, Julian spat, standing over her. "You swing like a blind drunk. If I had a knife, you would be dead right now. Get up." Una coughed again, spitting a mouthful of gritty, muddy water onto the ground. She pushed herself up, her bare feet slipping slightly in the mess. She glared up at him, pure anger starting to burn away the freezing cold. "Fuck you," she hissed, her voice rough and shaking. "Language doesn't win fights," Julian said, his face completely blank. "Get up and try again, and this time mean it." Una tightened her grip on the muddy dagger. She pushed off her back foot and lunged forward, aiming the blade straight for his stomach. This time she was faster, but Julian was still a monster. He twisted his torso slightly, letting the blade slice through the empty air right next to his hip. As she stumbled forward from the missed strike, he brought his elbow down hard onto the center of her back. Una cried out in pain as she crashed face first into the mud again. The impact rattled her teeth. Her chin scraped against a hidden rock under the surface, tearing the skin. She lay there for a second, the heavy rain beating against her back, trying to remember how to breathe. The pain in her spine was deep and sharp. "Is this what you did when the High Council came for your family?" Julian's voice floated down to her through the loud storm. It wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than any knife. "Did you just fall down in the dirt and wait for them to die?" Una froze. The rain suddenly felt miles away. The sound of the storm faded into a dull, distant ringing in her ears. "Shut up," she whispered into the mud. "I bet you heard your mother screaming," Julian continued, his voice totally merciless. He started pacing a slow circle around her fallen body. The mud squelched loudly under his boots. "I bet you heard your father fighting them. He probably fought like a real alpha. He probably bled for you. And what did you do, Una? You ran into the woods and hid like a little rat." "Stop it," Una screamed. She pushed herself up onto her knees. Her chest heaved wildly. Tears mixed with the rain pouring down her face. Her breathing was coming in short, ragged gasps. "You turned off your wolf because you are a coward," Julian taunted, stopping right in front of her. He looked down at her with absolute disgust. "You let them die. And tomorrow night when Vane's hunters come over that wall, you are going to let my men die too. You are going to let me die, because you are nothing but a weak, broken little girl." Something inside Una snapped. It wasn't a slow break. It was a violent, massive explosion in the very center of her chest. A sound ripped out of her throat. It wasn't a human scream. It was a deep, guttural, vibrating snarl that echoed off the high stone walls of the courtyard. The sound was so loud, so completely feral, that a horse in the nearby stables kicked its stall door in panic. Una didn't stand up. She launched herself right off her hands and knees. The mud didn't slow her down this time. She moved with terrifying, explosive speed. She hit Julian squarely in the chest, her full body weight crashing into him. Julian grunted in surprise as her momentum forced him to take a heavy step backward. Before he could regain his balance, Una swung the dagger. She didn't swing wild. She swung with precise, deadly intent, aiming straight for the soft flesh under his jaw. Julian reacted purely on instinct. He threw his left arm up, blocking her strike with his thick forearm. The silver blade sliced cleanly through his wet linen shirt and bit deep into his skin. Hot, bright red blood instantly sprayed out, mixing with the cold rain. Julian didn't even flinch at the pain. He dropped his arm and punched her straight in the stomach. The blow lifted Una right off her feet. She flew backward, landing hard on her back, sliding several feet through the wet mud. But this time she didn't stay down. She didn't cough. She didn't cry. She rolled backward over her own shoulder, landing perfectly on her hands and feet in a low, predatory crouch. Her bright white hair was completely coated in black mud, hanging wild around her face. She looked up at Julian. Her eyes were no longer silver-grey. They were glowing. A bright, burning, unnatural silver light poured out of her pupils, cutting through the dark night like twin lanterns. The rain hissed as it hit her hot skin. Her chest rumbled with a continuous low growl that shook the puddles on the ground. Julian stood perfectly still in the rain, holding his bleeding arm. The cut was deep, the blood running down his wrist and dripping rapidly from his fingers into the mud. He looked at her glowing eyes. He looked at the wild, animalistic way she held her body. A slow, dark smile spread across Julian's face. It was the smile of a man who had finally found exactly what he was looking for. "There she is," Julian whispered into the storm. Una didn't respond with words. Her mind was entirely gone. The human girl who scrubbed floors and feared the dark was locked away. The wolf was fully awake, and the wolf only wanted blood. She pushed off the mud so hard a large chunk of dirt flew up behind her. She crossed the 10 feet between them in less than a second. She didn't use the dagger this time. She dropped it into the mud and tackled him around the waist. Julian braced his legs, but her strength was impossible. It was the raw, unnatural power of a pureblood royal shifter. She drove him backward until his back slammed violently against the thick stone wall of the courtyard. The impact shook the rain off the roof above them. Una reached up, grabbed him by the throat with both hands and squeezed. Her nails dug into his skin, drawing fresh drops of blood. She bared her teeth, her lips pulling back in a terrifying snarl. She was going to rip his throat out. She was going to kill him. Julian didn't panic. He didn't try to pull her hands away. He simply reached up with his massive, heavy hands and grabbed both sides of her face. His grip was entirely firm, but not brutal. He held her head still, forcing her glowing, furious eyes to look directly into his dark, calm ones. "Una," Julian commanded. His voice wasn't a shout. It was an alpha command, deeply layered with a heavy, vibrating dominance that rolled straight into her bones. "Look at me." The wolf inside her fought the command. She snapped her teeth, trying to bite his fingers. She squeezed his throat harder, but Julian didn't look away. He didn't blink. He poured all of his own immense strength into his gaze, forcing his will against hers. "I am not the enemy," Julian said, his voice dropping to a harsh, rough whisper right near her ear. "I am your king, and you are my weapon. Wake up." Una froze. Her glowing eyes flickered rapidly, the bright silver light fighting a desperate battle against the human grey. Her breathing was entirely out of control, hot and heavy against his face. She stared at the thick cut on his arm, the blood washing away in the rain. She stared at the red marks her own fingernails were making on his throat. Slowly, the bright light in her eyes faded out. The sharp, feral growl in her chest died away into a broken, shaking sob. Una let go of his neck and stumbled backward. She looked at her hands. They were covered in mud and his blood. She started shaking so violently she could barely stand. The cold of the storm rushed back in, hitting her hard. I cut you," Una stammered, her human voice returning, cracking with absolute terror. "I'm sorry, Julian, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, I lost control." Julian stepped away from the wall. He looked down at his bleeding arm. He didn't look angry at all. He reached down to the hem of his wet linen shirt, grabbed the fabric, and ripped a long, thick strip right off the bottom. He wrapped it tightly around his bleeding forearm, tying it off with his teeth and his good hand. "Do not ever apologize for bleeding your enemy, Una," Julian said flatly. He walked over to her, his large boots sloshing in the mud. He stopped right in front of her. "Tomorrow night when those hunters drop over that wall, I want you to remember exactly how this felt. I want you to let her out. Do not hold her back. Do not hide her. You let her kill every single thing in a black cloak that breathes." Una looked up at him. She was exhausted. Her body felt like it had been beaten with hammers. But beneath the cold, beneath the fear, she felt something else. She felt the wolf pacing in the back of her mind. The wolf was awake, and the wolf was hungry. "They will bring silver," Una whispered, the rain washing the mud from her pale face. "If they cut me with silver, the wolf will break again." "They won't get the chance," Julian said. He reached out and gently rested his heavy, warm hand on the back of her wet neck. The touch was completely unexpected, sending a sudden, sharp shock of heat straight down her spine. "Because I will be standing right next to you, and I do not miss."